And we're live. Welcome, everybody, to yet another weekly for the new diffs architecture design workflow. So, Thomas, you seem to have the first point.
Yeah. Just wanted to kind of point attention to the current status of the blueprint document. Um, a number of weeks ago, I opened a bunch of issues to sort of outline drafts of some sections of that. Um, and in the interest of sort of progressing, I've merged all the MRs for those issues, just like a rough draft of things. So take a look at the blueprint document, read through it, and let's iterate on this with MRs. Because what's merged right now is basically kind of what I initially wrote in those issues in MRs. So we should iterate on this and enhance it. Um, there's there's more context for some of this stuff in those MRs, but it's really hard to like match lines of a markdown document to the MR. So I guess if you have questions on anything, feel free to ping me and I will be like, oh yeah, we had a discussion on that in this MR. But other than that, it's open for MRs to edit that.
One thing from me, I also merged because from me, like the initial accessibility outline. But we had a discussion in the MR with Steph and with Natalia, like it was a bit specific and might be limiting because I was proposing very concrete HTML structure. And my problem is that was the least specific I was going to propose, and everything I have on accessibility would be very, very specific. So I'm thinking if that's like the right time to actually add that, maybe wait. I have a document with things listed for later, and maybe I'll just like wait for the point where we are in the moment to discuss the specific implementation. Yeah.
Wait, but you have the details now? You have information because we can expand them now.
Based on how we displaying this now, but they're very specific to current structure.
Oh, okay.
So like they might be things like to avoid not to do next time we're implementing diffs, but until the moment we actually have HTML structure, that will be just like, yeah, what we're doing not that well now, and yeah, just good practices basically, not things that are very helpful at this point.
So would you say that every finding you had would be covered by the metric of meeting or exceeding the DCAG, WCAG, and the ATAG 2.0 triple double A?
Yeah, basically, yes.
Okay, so what that means is the current documentation already covers those. The findings will be incredibly important for the implementation part, maybe not for the architecture. So, okay, so that's probably what you were saying. I was a bit slow understanding. So, thanks. Cool. I had one question. First, thanks, Thomas, for pushing this forward. It definitely feels like we're definitely making some progress on it, and it feels good. I know we had a discussion regarding the performance budget. I can't remember exactly where we landed. Is it still a follow-up that we might want to discuss further? Whether we should have different budgets for the first load versus the lifetime load of the app? Or are we just worried about just the app as a whole? Because, yeah.
So we can kind of address this in two ways. One way is under the metrics section, I really expanded the like caveats to the budgets. It's metric 5, which is basically kind of outlining the boundary of what the diffs app is, because that's kind of we're going to have to load things that completely blow our budget, and so the metric 5 sort of defines how we can add exceptions for those things, sort of. The other way to address this is just to say, if we care about our app being like accessible. I don't mean accessible like accessibility, but like accessible to more people. Those budgets are caps for the app. It doesn't matter whether they load up front or they load 10 seconds later. It's just like, here is what the average user in the world can sustain. And so whether we do it, whether we load 1K up front and then trickle out the rest, it just kind of, it doesn't really matter. So I would say we focus on that as a hard cap, and that will allow us to, or that will keep us accountable to do things as efficiently as possible.
Sure. Okay. I think that's fine for now, but we have to again be realistic in the perspective that we'll have at certain point to include the markdown editor, for example. Like we're not going to get.
Yeah. That is specifically outlined in that exact example is in metric 5. Basically says one example is the markdown editor.
Sure.
It's loaded asynchronously. Yep.
5C. Yep. Got it now. I read 5. I hadn't read all the 5As, 5Bs. So yeah, thanks for
it gets really complex
but that's what we want. So that's what we want at this point, is just to set us up for success in like not accruing unnecessary weight. The necessary weight is part of it, apparently, but the unnecessary weight, we need to keep ourselves accountable. And I feel like it fulfills now that I'm reading that a bit more. So, which is what we want. We want to be fast, nimble, lean. So, all right, that satisfies my question. Thank you so much. Any other thoughts, or can we move on to Stanislav? Stanislav, you have the floor.
Thanks. My first point is about streaming support in Rails. I've tried it out, and short answer is that it doesn't work with GitLab. So I've tried live methods, which basically serve you service send events implementation. I've tried that, didn't work. I've tried using that to basically hack it and make it work as a streaming response to serve HTML. It also didn't work. And the main problem was that the response was always buffered. So Rails waited basically for the whole duration of the controller execution, and only after that it returned any data, which is exactly the same as like doing it without streaming. So it doesn't provide any benefit. I suppose this is related to our middlewares in Rails, or maybe one of them is forcing a buffered response, or it might be our server, which is Puma, I think. And it can also be a reason for that behavior. And since this is getting into a very buggy, weird territory, I'm going to leave it as forget about it and maybe return to it, I don't know, in a couple of years. If any of applicant engineers can make it work, that would be incredible, but at least I couldn't. So for now, we'll have to stick with paginated and batched requests when requesting server-side rendered markup.
Got it. Yeah. Thanks. Phil, I take it that you don't have experience with these particular code, right? Live and streaming.
No.
All right. I think it would be definitely worth starting either an issue or a thread on Slack about this particular point, to have the backend folks pay attention to this part of the call and just give us feedback asynchronous. Because apart from Justin, we don't have any, from Justin and Phil, we don't have any backend that's used to the particle review. Yeah, no, the only thing that we have similar to this is the WebSockets for GraphQL subscriptions, which wouldn't be very helpful here. I take. So Yeah, let's evolve the discussion asynchronously then. Just make sure that we bring it up before we discard it, and we go back to paginating.
Yeah, sure.
Cool. Thanks.
And my last point is about diffs SSR. So I've created an MR which basically covers the diffs SSR approach. Feel free to read it and leave your thoughts, maybe some suggestions, or maybe you don't like it at all. I don't know. So yeah, leave your comments. That would be very much appreciated. I also would like to mention that I ignored caching, highlighting, and real streaming there because we are not like 100% sure how it should be implemented. So I guess we'll add that at a later stage when we are defined how it should work with SSR.
Thanks. I have some thoughts on this. I did get to part of the call where you were talking about this last week with Patrick, but I didn't get to the end of it. So some of this might be outdated. So apologies. There's two things here. One is this is one of the paths that we're considering, right? We need to validate it in the feasibility side of things regarding the backend. How fast can the backend render this? And is it producing a better result? Because I don't think it's ideal to commit this to the architecture blueprint until we have some sort of validation that is bringing us to the goals, to the priorities of what we have, right? The perceived performance. What I'm saying is, I don't want us to get to February to start implementing to realize that it's slower than it is right now, right? I think that's it. Everybody's agreed to that. So I think what's missing right now is that part, like validating this approach that you have as an MR. You have several MRs, actually, the POCs, I think, for validating the backend side of things and how fast will that actually be in real life. Is that fair, Stanislav?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I wonder how we should go about this, like what specifically we should measure. That's our main question. Like,
sure.
Is it total blocking time?
No.
Is it
so
time
our goal? Our goals is perceived performance, right? Our goals, our priorities are perceived performance. Yeah. So what we think, so there's one thing here too as well, is our POC is built on the merge request diffs, right? Not on the repository commits diffs. So I think at least we need to have the backend in source code and backend in code review take a look at it and taking it through its paces and see how fast could we have that workflow, that flow generate the outcome we need, because there might be some things entangled with that, like pre-generating the caches, pre-generating the templates. Yeah, I need to see the diffs SSR POC again myself, because it's been a while. I have some questions on that. Question: do you think it would be useful to have a demo scheduled for this, so that everybody's on the same page? Maybe, I don't know if it'd be worth doing that during this call, but it is a timeline that it is time slot that we have reserved every week. So we have some time to explore it ourselves, but to bring everybody to the same page, we probably could use a little demo. What does everybody think? Will that be useful, or should we explore it individually?
I think we already have a demo. There is a POC and it has a link to the video presentation we did, so you can go and watch it and you'll have the demo.
Sure. But didn't we add anything after that demo? I was under the impression we had some improvements after that. Am I wrong?
I don't think we added anything significant.
Okay. You probably just completed then. Where is the video of the demo? I'm trying to find it.
I'll just link it in this issue.
Awesome.
This document.
be great. Or at least, if not, so if we have that demo, what we'd like to do then is to have a discussion exactly about this feasibility of the backend and what roadblocks we would need to sort out. And this is potentially something that is worth pinging the DRIs for the backend in source code and code review, which I'm happy to do. So they just make sure that we have the link to that demo there. Okay, perfect. I will make sure that we set the conversation for the next call on this, because again, I feel like we need to take it through its paces before we commit to any one solution. And if anybody, again, what I want to be very mindful of is this doesn't mean that we should stop exploring any potential other avenues, right? If you have any other ideas on how to achieve this project and this fast performance diffs viewer, we should still explore it until we have validation that that's the path we want to take. This is part of that conversation that many of us have had since the beginning of this. How are we going to juggle the different competing proposals, right? And this is how, scrutinizing each one that comes up and exploring until we have a clear picture of the whole workflow from Giddily to Rails to the front end. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts. So I'll tag the DRIs to schedule a conversation. We'll be tagged to have a conversation around feasibility of server-side rendered diffs with.
Can you expand a bit on the feasibility, because
sure.
As far as I understand, we already have like close to what I'm proposing approach on the commits page. Like I'm reusing actually the commits page
sure.
template. So technically we can like just replace it and it will still work.
So the feasibility to me is, can we still fulfill every metric that we've set ourselves to by using this approach, which means the performance budgets, well, accessibility, it depends on the templates we build, but the perceived performance being better than it is right now, will that work? Because here's the back of my mind in this whole concept of server-side rendering. We've done this before, and we've let go of server-side rendering because it was too slow. Now, at the time, we didn't batch it. So that's the new thing. What I need to make sure, what we need to be absolutely sure of is this fast enough? Is this approach fast enough for the expectations of the new diffs that everyone has? And that's what I need to see, is like getting the data from Giddily to the backend to the front end fast enough to allow us to server-side render a diff that is much faster and doesn't set ourselves to go over the performance budget. Because what I'm hearing, if we server-side render every piece of diff, at least just the diff, even if we don't render every UI, eats a lot of markup, right? And that's where the performance budget comes into play, because a 5,000 files diff will definitely load more markup than a 10 files diff. So this is where we're going to be pushing our metrics to the test and to see whether they're reasonable or not. But right now, I just want to make sure that it's feasible, it's faster. We can get a faster app by using server-side rendering within GitLab's architecture and within this approach. And that's sort of an open question for now, I think. Does that make sense, Stanislav?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think we can prepare some comparison of what we have now and what we can have with SSR. But in order for us to quantitatively compare these things, we need to measure it. Like, I'm still confused what we should actually measure, because there are too many things in the diffs that can be slow. So I think we need to set some specific metrics that we should check against. Otherwise, we can win in some places and significantly lose in other places.
Yeah, that's a particular. So going to that particular part of your question, we have the timings API marks and measurements. We have that part of the app. I don't know if that's part of the POC. One of the things we have, I think it's first diff render or something. That's the moment. I think that's the moment that theoretically we can infer perceived performance metric, where what's the time that it takes to show the first diff rendered on the page, right? And we can measure that on current implementation, and we can measure that on the POC for merge request diffs. Again, we still need to hear from the source code folks about the feasibility of this in the source code side of things. That's why I think we need to have a focused discussion on this approach in particular from all ends. And now that we have this, the outline MR and the video presentation and all that published and summarized and everything, I think we're in a good spot to ask that of people to take some time, play with it during this week. And next Tuesday, we're going to have a conversation around that. And if you can't make the call, definitely try to participate asynchronously or with a video or with some agenda items, if you can. But yeah. Make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. So do we agree to consider the... I need to find the actual name of this first diff file. You asked, what metric should we look at? First diff file performance. What do we call it? Timings, API, mark.
Yeah,
I think these are. Yeah, go ahead.
I think it is performance timings. But yeah, it's our only tracked performance timing. Is how long it takes to get to basically the first diff rendered. So Andre, when you mentioned, server-side rendering can create a lot of markup, I wonder if it's worth adding an additional caveat to our performance budget metrics to say, because there's no potential amount of data that a user might see in the diffs app is unbounded. I mean, they could see an unlimited amount of files technically. Practically, they're probably limited by certain things on our servers and across the network and that kind of stuff. But technically, they could be looking at gigabytes of diffs that we have to wrap in our markup. And I wonder if we should add some boundary to the app to say our budgets don't include, well, first of all, the diff itself, like the actual markup, like the actual source code, but then also maybe I'm just throwing out a number like 1 kilobyte per file or something of like additional markup. But I don't know what a good number would be that we can just like write off as this is to show their data. It would probably need testing to be like, this is what we could reasonably wrap a file in.
We need to have a discussion about this. Can you open an issue to discuss this? And I'll share my thoughts here, but we need to move it to a synchronous discussion. And here's why. We've had this conversation before when we talked about that OKR last, like 2 years ago, to improve the performance of diffs, where which size MR, right? Which size diff. And at the time, we kind of like took some references and like defined like a P90 percentile, 90th percentile diff size. And we use that as sort of like a reference to like measure everything against. Here, what we're interested about is the rate at which the markup transfer grows with the size of the MR, So it's probably like an equation between number of files or number of lines changed and what's the number allowed. So we probably want to need to have a dynamic performance budget.
Yeah, something
based off the number of the files, what would be the performance budget for that diff? So let's discuss. But it's a great point, and I think we're definitely going to do ourselves a favor by having that defined with discussion rather than just a line in the sand and then just cut that to users, because we know they hate that. They've told us very vehemently on the issues. Some of them demanded that we had a button to expand all diffs no matter what happens to GitLab and the browser. Just give me everything. Yeah.
Very cool and useful.
That's problematic.
Funny that you say that, because I think we will have that button soon.
Sure. But I think we always have a hard limit on the platform. It's just like one of those placebo buttons, maybe. Or maybe we'll have the actual thing. I don't know. We'll see. Cool. But Thomas, can you create that issue and share it in a Slack channel, please?
Yes.
Cool. You have anything else in the agenda?
Would it be okay? I'm gonna take my own medicine. Would it be okay if I just open an MR against the blueprint and then most of that? Yeah.
That's aligned with our values. That's fine.
Okay.
So for anybody watching this that is not familiar with the performance marks that we have, so these are the ones that show up when you have a performance bar open on the diffs tab, on the changes tab. When you refresh it, you're going to see the marks being added with the timing, the starting time, and the duration of that all. The one we're looking for is probably the first diff file shown, which I think we might have to take into account the start time, I guess, because apparently this is, but I don't know what the duration here is calculating from.
There's some
start.
I'm not sure. It's not quite bugginess, but there's some weird like not race conditions, but
for the calculation.
Yeah, like you can see that a bunch of the numbers are 3303, which
it's a very small diff. So it's a one file. So that's okay for them to align.
But like you would expect the file tree start and end to be at least like one microtick off. to like have to go to the next one. And so like there's some like asynchronous stuff happening where like it can't publish the performance mark and then suddenly it does both.
We need to revise this. We need a task to revise this before we start accounting for it, because the diff file's done is finished before the rest
diff
of the
files. I believe that's process.
Files.
Yeah, it's processing, not showing. So it processes it, then it shows the tree, then it shows the files.
So files end is what we're looking for. Diff files end is the last bit.
The thing we'll have to consider here is also the time to actually get the request finished. So with our approach, we try to do nothing on the page on the Rails side. It doesn't have the merge request metadata. It doesn't have diffs. We all do that using additional requests. And with SSR approach, we already include that on the page. So the time to get the page done will be higher. And I'm not sure if the performance API actually considers that information here. If it marks the beginning as soon as you hit enter in the address bar, or it doesn't. If it doesn't, we have to incorporate here as well.
I think it starts counting on as soon as it starts rendering the page. I'm not entirely sure.
Then we won't get an accurate timing, I think.
Right.
Because for the SSR, the start time will be 0.
Wait. So you're saying that on server-side rendering, the requests that are coming with the server-side rendering markup comes straight up embedded on the page and not called asynchronously?
with the diffs POC, we show you
Sure.
the first 5 files already on the page and just stream the rest.
Oh, I see.
So the start time will be 0 if it doesn't count the time it took to actually deliver the page to the client.
You're right. You're right. So how should we do this? Yeah,
I will dig
question.
a bit deeper into this to see how we can retrieve that information. I think it's included in the performance API. We should just have to find it.
Right. Yeah, I see what you mean now. I think now I actually see what you mean. Yeah, let's think about that and come up with something that would be useful to see. Let me just do a render of all that. Yeah, we actually need to have a timing from the very beginning of that.
Yep.
I mean, if we have to, again, for this purpose, it could be a manually calculated metric. What I mean by that is if we grab the performance timings API timing and we add that to the time of the request of the HTML, I know it's not exactly right because the browser starts getting the content. If it's a really large HTML file, they start rendering before the end and all that stuff. Still, if we have a fake metric, remember the point of that metric is to educate the architecture blueprint, period. It's not to have specifically something tracked that for all eternity. So if it's a bit more complicated to calculate, it's okay too. It's okay too to have. So keep that in mind when you think about that, Stanislav. Oh, hey, Igor.
Well, yeah, sorry, I had an overlapping meeting.
No problem. I didn't see you come in. So since you're here and you're the DRI for source code, right here on the diffs server-side rendering outline MR that we're talking about, we need to validate the feasibility. So validate the feasibility. Validate the feasibility of the server-side rendering diffs approach from the backend perspective, and how fast can we get that data for large MRs and stuff, whether that's feasible. Or what I'm thinking about is if a merge request is if a diff from the repository has a lot of files and stuff, can we still make the first files render very quickly? So that's the biggest question on my mind. But go watch the recording. We discussed that a little bit at length here. I won't repeat it for everyone's time. Sick. Cool. Any other thoughts that we haven't covered yet? Cool. No, nothing else. Justin, any updates from Giddily that we need to know from Giddily land? I know that we had some changes coming in.
Yeah, nothing too big has happened. Right now, we're kind of focusing on making a change to how we detect whether or not a file is generated for a diff. And so that's being moved onto the Giddily side. And that's going to be, we're still kind of designing out what the interface for that will look like, because it's going to have to be coordinated with all the other RPCs for fetching diff data.
Okay, thanks. Feel free to fill in my representation of your response there.
Yeah, I'll put the issue in there too for that.
Awesome.
There's some ongoing discussion there.
So we can take a look at it and keep following that. Great. Then with that, I think that concludes our call. I'll make sure that this gets available before I ping the DRIs. And then we can have, so we're aiming to have a discussion about the feasibility of server-side rendering diffs approach from the backend perspective, which also involves the conversation from Stanislav about which metric we should use to compare between the now and the that next week on the next call. So looking forward to that. Until then, let's use the time to explore this proposal. And if you have any other proposals, don't be shy, bring them up. We're all friends here, and we just want to make sure that we find the best approach for the problem. Right. Thanks, everybody. If anything comes up, we're on Slack.